All right, welcome back to another live. I'm your host, Joseph Lewin, and today I'm super excited to be joined by Sidney Evans. Sidney is a global expert on communication, and he's a best-selling author, keynote speaker. So really excited to have him join me today to talk about the role that emotional intelligence plays, especially as AI is flooding the market. If you're not in some way thinking about AI and how it's going to affect your job, how it's going to affect the market, how it's going to affect your industry, it's something you probably should be paying attention to.
I would say so.
But at the same time, what are the most valuable skills? And I think on one side, people are saying the most valuable skills are learning how to use AI. And I think there's definitely really solid case for that. But on the flip side, I would take the perspective of, hey, relational skills become even more valuable because as people interact with technology, what do they really long for and hunger for? It's human connection. So, Sidney, super excited to have you join me today and talk
Thank
about
you. Thank
emotional
you.
intelligence.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Happy Monday to everyone.
Yeah, this is going to be a good conversation. I think a really timely one. So I'm just going to ask the question that basically frames up what I just introed with, which is, as AI really floods the market and, more and more people are interacting with AI agents and bots and, all this stuff on a daily basis, how do you feel like how do you feel like emotional intelligence fits into the future of, roles that people have?
Great question. So let me level set first and say what emotional intelligence actually is. So it's the ability to regulate, manage, and influence your behavior, right? That's really what it is. And influence is a key point, and that's a key point for leaders moving forward. What I would argue is the companies that see emotional intelligent leaders and develop them will have a competitive advantage moving forward. So to your point, let's think about human-centered leadership, right? What does that look like with AI? AI is great with data, logic, things like that. But what does human-centered leadership look like, right? And so if you have an emotionally intelligent leader, trust me, they're human-centered, okay? The second point is ethical decision making. Like you really have to think about, the nuances of making decisions when you have AI, right? Because AI again is great at, analyzing and assessing data, but it's really not great at nuance. If you use Chat GPT, you understand that it's not the greatest at nuance. So you have to really think about how will ethical decision making happen under AI. And so emotional intelligent leaders will do that best. Three is team cohesion. And I can tell you that someone who's trained many teams need leadership. They need cohesion, and you have that when you have leaders who ask the right questions, who also are engaged. So how can AI engage a team, right? But leaders can engage a team. So emotionally intelligent leaders also help with team cohesion. And I would argue for companies, change management. Think about change management. This is when you're trying to manage adversity. When you're managing adversity, how does AI actually do that? Well, you need emotionally intelligent leaders to help with change management. So hopefully that gives a good framework of our discussion today.
Yeah, and there's a couple things from what you said that we could dive into, but one thing just stuck out to me right off the bat. This is probably a little bit of a sidebar before we get into the leadership piece. Is a part of emotional intelligence and the ability to regulate your own emotions and to change the way that you behave and communicate comes from for one, just having good core identity and like being in a solid place yourself where you're not looking to get your emotional needs met from like somebody on your team, or something like that. And so one thing that's really interesting about AI is that a lot of these companies have started to make the like ChatGPT, for example, has started giving more and more affirming responses to people because they found that when they give pushback to somebody,
Right.
the person uses their platform less. And
Absolutely.
so, just like any business, they're going to move towards a thing that helps people to use their platform more. So they're reinforcing this idea that they need to be affirming of people's ideas. So I kind of see this conundrum when you're talking about ethical decision making
Right.
and somebody being an emotional, intelligent person. If you're leaning on AI all the time in your decision making and to create ideas and to, figure out how you communicate better, but then AI is always leaning towards affirming you with what's going on rather than maybe challenging you to be better.
Absolutely.
How do you work through that as a leader, to make sure that you're not, just being affirmed by AI and not really being challenged in areas you need to grow?
Right. So let me unpack it a little bit for you. So first, what you said was, it's like the airplane analogy, right? Your cup being full, you have to put your mask on first before you can put other people's mask and save other people, right? So if your cup is not full, and the analogy for that is if you're not emotionally intelligent or at least aware, because self-awareness is a huge, huge piece of one of the 4 or 5 components of being emotionally intelligent, right? So self-awareness is key. But how do leaders do that? How are they self-aware, right? So emotional intelligence is not about being emotionally intelligent, is not about being nice, by the way, because a lot of people look at it as being nice. And so to your point around affirming behavior, it's not about being nice. It's really about analyzing what's happening with the other person, having some empathy around it, right? Having the ability to understand that it's not your situation, it's the other person's situation, and putting yourself in the other person's shoes. So sympathy obviously is different than empathy. So emotionally intelligent leaders are super empathetic, but they also know that they ask the right questions. And so I think that's going to be a key component moving forward. But again, it's not about being nice and rubbing people's back and making them feel good. That's not what emotional intelligence is. It really is about understanding what your team needs or understanding what your employees need, and then modifying that and sort of adapting appropriately for that. And there's some tools for that, by the way. So DISC, I'm a master trainer in DISC. And so a lot of companies utilize the DISC model. And so DISC is really like, the advanced version of Myers-Briggs, right? So if you think about it, there's really 4 types of people: dominant, intellect, steady and stable, cautious and conscientious. So if you think about people that are dominant, they're results oriented, right? If you think about people that have intellect, they're people oriented. If you think about steady and stable, they're service oriented. And if you think about cautious and conscientious, they're process oriented. So I came in a room, right? If I came in a room and I literally said, hey, it's too cold in here, I just turn up the heat. That's a D. That's D, right? That's results oriented, right? If I came in a room and it's too cold in here, and I said, Joe, are you cold? are you cold? Right? I'm people oriented. If I came in a room and I was service oriented, I would say, I'm so glad I bought my sweater. I'm so glad I can, take off my sweater or something like that in my own cocoon, right? Service oriented. If I came in and I was a C, I would say, I wonder if the air conditioner is broken here, Joe. Are you cold? Because I'd want to know the process. So the reason why DISC intersects with emotional intelligence is because it really does help you identify who your employee is or your team coworker or teammate is, and then it helps you vacillate in and out of who you are to deal more effectively.
Yeah, that's huge. It's interesting too that you brought up empathy versus sympathy, because a client of mine, Bob Berg, he's the best-selling author of the book The Go-Giver, and I recently watched a video that he did on that I was working with him on, where he talked about the difference between empathy and sympathy. And when it really came down to it, it's like sympathy is about you. It's I feel bad for you, but that's really about my emotion, and how I'm feeling. Whereas empathy is really leaning into, hey, I can see that you feel bad, and then asking the right questions to figure out how I can potentially actually help you and, to solve the situation. But it's then empathy is really about your emotions versus mine. And so anyway, I thought that was a good breakdown.
A good way to kind of frame empathy, if anybody ever, and it's not the hardest concept, but a good way to think about it is think of yourself as 2 people, right? Empathy is really 2 people. It's how you feel, but it's also understanding how the other person feels, right? That's really being empathetic. It's really, you're really 2 people. So
yeah, no, I like that. I like that breakdown. And one thing that's interesting too about what you're sharing is, my wife and I have done a bunch of classes. I don't want to go too far down this route, but we have 4 kids, and so we've done a bunch of classes on different parenting models, and one specifically around like the connected child and the whole brain child. And the idea is really about connection, right? And figuring out how to connect. And it's really interesting because I feel like a lot of the same principles apply to emotional intelligence at work. And when we're at home with our kids, we often default to like whatever it was that our parents did, right? And I think
Absolutely.
with leaders, it's similar, right? We often are going to default to whatever either our personality type tends towards, or
Mhm.
what we wish we had in a boss,
Mhm.
or we default to whatever our bosses did that we've had represented to us, uh,
Absolutely.
rather than figuring out how do we really build connection
Mhm.
with the person on our team. And a lot of times that starts by listening and asking the right questions and really understanding what is it that's going on with this person and what's the underlying thing,
Mhm.
and then helping them solve that problem or helping work through that, rather than coming in and just being like, I know best, and bullying
Absolutely.
other people.
Absolutely. Let me lean into the asking better questions, because I think we oftentimes state that. Let me give some framework around asking better questions. So if you're a leader or you have a teamwork or teammate, right, coworker, to ask them, are they good? Are you good? Is really not the most effective question in my opinion. I don't know
Yeah.
about you, Joe, but I mean, most people say, yeah, I'm good. I'm great. I feel good. Right. So a better question might be, what's energizing you today? What's
Hmm.
energizing you today? Or what I would argue is do a check-in. Like if you're a leader and you have a team, do a check-in. One of the greatest leaders that I know, and like a mentor of mine, they do a check-in. They say on a scale from 1 to 10, how are you feeling today? 10 being amazing, 8 being pretty good, right? And 5 being, so do a check-in.
Hmm.
That number then allows you and gives you some leeway and some runway to ask more effective questions as well.
Yeah, I love that. And then like, how do you how do you feel? I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on the meeting and everything like that. But I feel like a lot of times when people start thinking about asking questions, they're
Mhm,
usually going to ask a question and then move on to whatever is next. Like,
mhm.
how many questions do you feel like it's good for people to usually ask for them to really understand what's going on? Is it like asking a check-in question like that, and then they tell you, and then you kind of move on, or are there some other layers that you would want to go to?
This is where emotional intelligence comes in, right? Because if you're emotionally intelligent, and I know I'm going to say emotional intelligence about what, do I get a ticker, Joe, for how many times that I say emotional intelligence?
I need a little bell on my desk that I
Over
ring every
five,
time you say.
like on Jimmy Fallon or something. Listen, so if you're emotionally intelligent, okay, what I would argue is the first question gives you, okay, so think of it like a road, right? So it's really not about the amount of questions, it's about asking the right question. So if I ask you, Joe, what's energizing you today, or what project are you working on that's really, really giving you that energy, and what challenges might you have? Depending on your answer, right, I'm going to just lean into that direction, and then I'm going to cut it off. Now, if I'm your manager, right, if I'm your manager, what I would argue is it's probably not the best time in a meeting to do that. That, for me, that's like coworker questions, right? What's energizing? What's going on in a team meeting? If I'm your leader or manager, right, per se, I'm doing that check-in with you privately. And one of the tools that I also wanted to give you is always do 360 feedback check-ins. Always. I do it with my own personal life, by the way. So do 360 feedback check-ins, meaning, have 3 or 4 people, right, give feedback around a given topic or area, because you
Mm,
want different and by the way, not always people on your team per se, just different feedback around whatever you want the feedback from, but you want a cross section of people. And another thing that I do also as well is journaling.
mm,
And every single day, I swear I've been doing this for 25 years. Every single day, at the end of the day, I ask myself, what 3 things did I do really well today? And what
mm,
three things could I improve today? I've been literally doing it for 25 years. And I mean, this goes down to, you were at I'm getting a cheesesteak or something, or I'm going to, going to wherever, some restaurant. And I said, I really could have spoken to that person better. I really could have handled
mm.
that situation a lot better when I didn't get the refund that I wanted, or I didn't get, my order was incorrect. I probably could have handled that a lot better. It's a way to self-check-in, to hold yourself accountable, and also increase your emotional intelligence.
Yeah, that is extremely practical. It's kind of funny because I have a list of questions, but we're kind of covering them in a different order, which is great. No, I love
Usually
this.
what
This is
happens, right?
no, this is great. I much prefer a conversation like this. But one thing that I was going to ask you is like, what are practical things you've already shared? the couple,
Yeah.
right? The questions, and then that journaling stuff. I like that too because when you're doing that kind of self-reflection, it's just micro changes, and
Mhm.
when you do that over a long period of time, like I like to think about it as we really live in like a popcorn world, right? It's like, how do I get instant results? Yeah, I mean, I'm in marketing and sales and that side of
Mhm.
things. So it's always like, how do I drive revenue
Yeah,
this week or this month or this quarter or whatever, right?
for 20 years. I get it. Like
Yeah,
I gotta meet this goal, right?
yeah. And
Mhm.
I mean, you get whatever, you've got to meet goals and you got quota, whatever. I get that. But at the same time, the things that really move the needle are things that are more like brisket, right? It's like
Mhm.
if you throw a brisket in the microwave, that's not going to work out very well. And if you only
100%.
ever eat popcorn, it's not going to
100%.
really do much for you, right? So, what are these things that you could do? And what you just described about journaling, to me, that's a smoker. Uh, that's a smoker activity where you're putting your brisket in the smoker and you're letting it, mature over 12
Absolutely.
hours.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And
And
giving it time to
think
rest.
about think about the Japanese principle of Kaizen, right? Continuous improvement. That whole principle is based on doing a little bit each day to get better. Kaizen, continuous improvement. So if you think of your life in that way, to your point, and by the way, I much prefer my brisket in the oven slow cooked, by the way, or the slow cooker versus a
Yeah.
microwave.
Yeah. It's going to be very, very tough and chewy. And so, yeah, part of that is just having also vision for who you want to become, right?
Hmm.
And so, I mean, I don't want to lead the witness here, but I've always felt like, and I mean, the older I get, also, the more I feel like having long-term vision of who you want to become lets you to make the right micro changes each day, right? Because otherwise, you're just kind of like going to be led by whatever is going on. But I feel like the people I know who are highly emotional and emotionally intelligent, they're moving towards something much longer term, right? And they're able to slow down, ask better questions of other people and themselves, so they really have a good baseline.
I can't tell you, it's funny you bring that up. I can't tell you how many startups that I've worked with, literally from Stockholm to Cairo, literally all over the globe. And the number one question that most of these companies can never answer is, what are you actually selling? What do you do? And
Mm.
who are you? These three questions literally stump people. Like, who are you? Not what do you do, but who are you? And so if you don't have clarity around who you are and where you're going, I would argue that it's going to be really difficult to have self-awareness around how to get there. So,
Yeah. Oh, that's a great point. And that's like, it's kind of interesting because people want the things that amplify
mhm,
because they think that those are the end in themselves. But the things that amplify, they're just amplifying what's inside of you. So let's
100%.
say money, right? Money is going to amplify whatever's in your heart already. So if you're greedy and you're selfish and you get more money, you're going to be greedy
100%.
and selfish on a whole nother level, right? Whereas if you're
Absolutely.
generous, you're kind, you're, looking for ways to serve other people, more money is going to amplify your
Absolutely.
generosity, your humility, whatever. And same with like company growth, right?
Right.
Like, if you are looking just to get success for yourself, you want people to think a certain way about you, you're getting your identity from how big your company is, how many employees you have.
Mhm.
The larger you grow, the more that ego is going to come out, and the more it's going to force you to have to do things that are, you know, maintaining that, right?
Right. I always say, whatever insecurities that you may have, you might want to deal with them before you get money. Because if you got a lot of insecurities, when you get money, it's only going to amplify where. So I totally agree. I couldn't agree more.
Okay, so let's. I want to kind of dig into what you were just talking about there, and then we can kind of round out what's saying, okay, how do we pull a bunch of these ideas together?
Okay.
So emotional intelligence, we've kind of established, hey, that's important, and we're saying in the role, in this age of AI, as that's happening more and more, these skills become more valuable because the less that people are leaning into something,
Mhm.
the more valuable that it becomes when you have it right. But then, if you want to have emotional intelligence, we just kind of talked about, you have to know who you are and
Mhm.
you have to know where you're going. So, what would be some recommendations or practical things that people can do to start answering that? I mean, I know that's kind of life's question, right? Why am I here?
A
You know,
very big question.
but how would you go about encouraging somebody who doesn't have an answer for that? What are some things they can do to start, kind of developing who they are and what their purpose is?
So this is not a plug for my book. Trust me, it's not. But in the book, Run Your Own Race, I do give a series of questions that you can ask to help you identify that. So I'll give you a few. The first thing is, what are you really aiming for? Like, what are you aiming for? I don't mean the job that you're aiming for, but like what value proposition do you have, right? So one of the biggest things that you have to answer is, what's my value prop? First, where do I want to go, right? What am I trying to achieve? I mean, not your job per se, but in life, like, what are you trying to achieve? Like, two would be, what's a tagline that would describe you as a person? Always ask people, like, what's your personal brand statement? Like, every company has a brand statement, slogan. What's the slogan for your life? Like, for me, it's to be the voice for people who don't have a voice, right? That's a slogan, one of the slogans that I utilize for my life, to be the voice for people who don't have a voice. So what is that for you? That's rhetorical for you, Joe. I mean, I want to know yours as well. But once you know that, then you have a North Star. And then from there, you can start connecting the dots on how to get there. But I would argue that those two questions starts the conversation to develop around where you want to go and how you want to get there. Is that
Yeah, I
helpful?
think that's excellent. And I mean, one of the ways that people are using AI and ChatGPT, especially younger people, but I would say even a lot of younger millennials. I'm kind of in the mid to high range millennial. But anyway, the one way that people are using it is almost as like a therapist, right? Where they're going and asking these questions and trying to figure that out, which, I think there can be a use case for that where it could be a little bit helpful. But I think when you're talking to something that's purposely trying to affirm you in something, and you're putting all this information out there, you can get yourself into trouble really quickly.
Okay.
But the reason that I'm bringing that up is I think what you're talking about is really important to start asking those questions, because it's not something that somebody from the outside is going to be able to dictate for you. And if you're just going to ChatGPT and you're trying to ask those questions to it, it's literally just like a conglomeration of a lot of other people's ideas. So it's kind of like maximizing other people's opinion all into one spot in a very affirming way.
Correct.
And so then, I love that line of questioning, because if you're going to be emotionally intelligent, there might also come a point where you realize maybe you're in the wrong role or the wrong field, and you might be feeling frustrated or, feeling something internally that's making it difficult for you to lead or difficult for you to connect to other people. And it's possible that you're just like doing the wrong thing with your life, and focusing on the wrong thing. And, I'm not a huge advocate of like jumping off a moving train unless you're in danger. But if you don't start asking that question of your personal tagline, and then saying, is the career path that I'm on, is the company that I'm at, is the industry that I'm in, does that align with that core identity of who I want to see myself as? Whether I see myself as, and I would even say it's not necessarily something that you are right now, right? It's like, this is who I want to be known for.
Right.
And if you haven't done that work, how in the world are you going to be able to lead a team or lead if you have no idea where you're going?
And that's why I think it's so important. It's such great points, Joe. This is why I think it's so important that you have the roadmap first, because if I can guarantee you this 100%, this is factual. If you don't figure out who you are, someone else will figure it out for you. Trust me, they will figure it out for you. So you really have to have clarity, especially as you go higher up the ladder. You really need to know who you are, because you really shouldn't. By the way, this is another point I want to bring up. You really shouldn't depend on leaders to emotionally develop you, right? That's really not the goal. The goal is, hopefully you get emotionally intelligent leaders that really make you feel seen and heard and valued. But if you don't get that, how do you do it on your own, right? And so what I would argue is that the people who are able to do it on their own, or to develop on their own, just a little bit per day, a little bit, 1% Kaizen, right? These are going to be the people that lead in the future. Because I can guarantee you this, Emotional intelligence will be the competitive advantage for companies moving forward. 100%.
I completely agree with you on that, because, as you know, again, I just named this about AI because I think that it actually is extremely relevant for those reasons, because basically, like, doing stuff
Mhm.
is becoming commoditized, and even doing smart stuff, like,
Mhm.
even if you're like a world leading expert, or at least like a pretty respected expert in a field, that expertise, the value of your expertise just went down significantly, and it'll continue to go down. Now, if you're ultra specialized, that might be different.
Mhm.
So what is it that actually sets you apart? It's your ability to be able to actually bring those ideas to life. And the only way that's going to happen is through your ability to influence other people.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean,
Absolutely.
the idea itself is a commodity. So then the differentiator is, how can you work with other people to get that idea to come to life inside of them, so that then the end product can actually get
Absolutely.
out there.
Listen, the people that make the most money from entertaining aren't often the best. They're not the best singers. They're not. I mean, typically the best actors make a lot. But what I would argue is the people that are performing, which is a good tangible example, right? Oftentimes they have the most connection with their audience, right?
Yeah.
And if you look at social media now, and you look at I hate the word influencers, but if you want to use the word influencers, those that are monetizing the most are the ones that connect the most with the audience. Not that they're even offering that much value, a lot of them, in my opinion. That's just my personal opinion, but they're connecting with their audience. So what I would argue, if you translate that to companies, now, how can you connect better to your team? How can you connect better to other people? And
Yeah.
again, these will be the people that will lead.
Yeah. And one thing I want to kind of tie back to something that I brought up earlier is with being a parent.
Hmm.
I don't want my kids to be emotionally dependent on me, right?
Exactly.
Now, obviously, I need to be, and my wife and I, our job is to be a stable place, so that they're not having to go seek emotional
Correct.
stability from an outside source, right? So we need to have an emotionally stable place, but that's a baseline, right? Then my job as a parent is to go and connect with my child and help them to develop their own ability to work through a challenge, to negotiate their needs, to
Hmm.
build that connection with each other, to build that connection with us, then to learn how to build connection with other kids, other adults, and as they do that, now they're going to come into the world, hopefully, the goal is
Right.
in a place where they're not seeking that connection from somebody else, which, that's going to be much less likely that they're going to be taken advantage of by somebody else, or, or
100.
anything. And then they're leading from that place. And I think as leaders in an organization, obviously it's not your kids that you're managing, so it's not a perfect example,
Right.
but I
Right.
think it's kind of relevant, right? You're there to build connection with your team, understand where they're coming from, but then to empower that person to have their own personal tagline, their own vision, and help them come to those conclusions on their own, and really either embrace what you're doing and move the team forward, or recognize, like, hey, maybe they're not the best fit because their personal goals don't align with the company, right? And if you can't build that connection and you can't empower people to get there, you're going to really struggle to lead.
Absolutely. And such a great point you bring up. And self-regulation also is a key component of emotional intelligence, right? So I love the example around your children, because those that have the ability to self-regulate their emotions, invaluable, right? Because how many different times or scenarios will someone's kid or a teammate or something say something that you didn't like or made you feel a certain way? So your ability to self-regulate that, put it in a box, understand where it came from. These are all of this is like emotional intelligence for the stars, right?
Yeah.
That's when you really are reaching the highest levels of emotional intelligence.
Yeah, and I know I'm kind of hounding on this, and we'll move on here in a second. But one line from some training that we've gotten is, a dysregulated adult can't help regulate a dysregulated child.
100%. I love
and,
that.
and so it's the same. Like, a dysregulated leader
Hmm.
can't help to bring regulation and clarity to their team.
Absolutely.
And so if
Absolutely.
you're a boss who's constant, if you're a leader and you're constantly set off by your team, and they say the smallest thing and you take it personally, and then you take that out on your team, you're not going to actually be able to bring clarity to your team and that connection and cohesion.
And by the way, if you want to see lack of emotional intelligence, turn on YouTube videos, like where you see these people that go into a Subway or something, they get the wrong order, they go to McDonald's and the French fries are cold, and they just literally, I mean, they have blowups like I've never seen before. It almost feels like, what is going on? And I get that, things are stressful, but things have always been stressful, right? And things are always going to be stressful. So again, we really, really do need to have more conversations like this, Joe, around emotional intelligence. I'm so glad you had me on discussing this today. I really, really am. It's really powerful.
Yeah. So I'm going to give you a chance to where I want you actually to just like tell us a couple things that you want people to take away, and then just basically pitch what you're doing. Because I love what you're talking about here, and I want people to find out more about what you're doing and get connected. Before I do that, I actually just, so this is for the audience. If you're listening to this episode, I just kicked off. I'm just kicking it off. It's brand new. A community for people who are looking to grow their personal brand and grow their influence and dive into that. So if you're interested in that, shoot me a direct message and I'd love to get you connected with this community. But yeah, having said that, Sidney, what are some things that you want, like if there's one or two takeaways that somebody listening who's trying to work through this, your message has resonated with them, what do you want them to take away from today?
I want them to start actively listening. Start actively listening. The second thing I want them to do is to model vulnerability, especially for leaders. I didn't bring that point up earlier. That's such an important point, is to model vulnerability. What does vulnerability look like to you? And three, I want you to really work on getting 1% better each day. Really take on one of the practical tips I gave you. Journal, do a 360 feedback with your family and friends. Like really lean into how you can get better and take some tangible, actionable steps.
I love that. So what are some ways that people can learn more about what you're doing, and what are some of the programs that you run that people could get involved with?
Right. So my book, best-selling book, Run Your Own Race, is out. The ebook is coming out soon. Again, it's Run Your Own Race on Amazon. Also, I recorded the Audible, so you hear me talk a lot. If you like to hear me talk today, you'll hear it a lot more on the Audible of my book. But the ebook's coming out. I'm excited to announce that I'm almost done writing my second book. That'll be out probably early next year. And I do have SidneyEvansGlobal.com, SidneyEvansGlobal.com, where I have programs for disc training for companies. I do emotionally intelligent workshops for leaders and companies as well.
Awesome. Yeah. And I've really enjoyed hearing your voice. You've got that nice, like,
thank you.
Late night FM DJ voice. I like it. It's very soothing.
I'm a former voice actor, Joe. I don't know if you know that, but I'm a former voice actor. So
I love it. Yeah. I can tell that you've got that down. So
thank you.
I'll have to get the Audible version because
and by the way, that Audible version is really great for children, Joe, by the way, for like young adults. I mean, in their teen, because really it's the framework, it's the 12 steps that I utilized to build my personal brand. When I was in corporate and I separated from corporate, these are the steps that I utilize. And it has a lot of questions in there. It's easy. It's an easy read. And I purposely made it easy like that for people to be able to go back to it and mark it and write it up. Okay.
I love it. Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Sidney, for joining me today. Really appreciate it. This is such an important topic, and I'm glad you're out there helping people work through emotional intelligence. And
I'm trying my best. I'm trying my best. Joe, thank you for having me. Thank you to your community. It's really lovely speaking with you.
Awesome. Well, look forward to talking to you again soon. And thanks for tuning in, everybody.
Take care, guys.